Bart Stever. I am the senior minister here at Parkside, and we are in the middle of 12 conversations. If this is your first Sunday with us, we're glad you're here, and we're having 12 conversations about what it means to be a genuine follower of Jesus Christ. How we can be the real deal as we represent Him, as we wear His name, and as people observe our lives and understand what He's about by seeing what we're about. And marriage and family is a big part of that, because that's where life begins with us. That's where we leave every day to go out into the world, is the home that we live in, the family that we're a part of. And of all the places that our relationship with Christ should be authentic, that's the place where it should be. And that's where it begins, because it affects everything else in our lives, doesn't it? It has a big impact on us as to how things are going at home. Now, I'm probably the last person that should be talking about pop culture and country music, but somebody asked me today as we were getting ready to show this video clip, they said, "You know they're divorced, don't you?" Yeah, I do know that. In the checkout line at Kroger's, I've read all about it. But I don't mean to hold them up to ridicule, I don't. And that's a very sad video to hear Miranda Lambert pouring her heart out, I think sincerely, as to what she hoped would be true as she started life with Blake Shelton. And some trials and tribulations came along that they couldn't handle. Gwen Stefani came along, and shouldn't have happened, but it did. And so let's talk about marriage, because marriage, as God gave it to us, is a very good thing. It's the first thing He gave to us. Before there was anything else that He established between human beings here on earth, the very first thing was a marriage, and very soon after that was a family. And He intended that to be this place of goodness and wholeness and health and fulfillment. Every good thing is God's intention for marriage. It's a wonderful relationship. And many of you here today would say, yes, I agree. And that has been our experience and is our experience right now. It's a good thing. But others of you might say, I wish, but not so much. You know, it's really, really hard. And right now it's really hard because as a family and as a couple, we are in deep crisis. So I wish it were true, but it's not. Well, let's look at marriage from a couple of perspectives. First of all, let's look at marriage and family from a cultural perspective. What's going on with marriage in the United States of America right now? What are the cultural trends? Well, here's a few. First of all, marriage is becoming a bit of an anachronism. An anachronism is something that's considered out of date. It's old-fashioned, terribly old-fashioned. It's a throwback, and many people see marriage as that. That's something you see on TV land, but it isn't relevant today. They've done research. The Pew Research Center interviewed millennials. Millennials, this is a group, a demographic in our society that's aged 14 to 34. There are 81 million millennials. That is almost 1/4 of our population. And so they talk to these millennials, and 25% of the 25% are likely to never be married. Not going to happen. There's reasons that they give. One is economic. They say it just doesn't make economic sense. Now, shame on us if our culture, our society is stacked up in such a way that somehow you are financially penalized if you get married. Shame on us if that's the case. I don't really know. What I do know is that when I got married, I never thought to ask that question. Can we afford to do this? All I knew was we were in love and we wanted to get married. And so we did. And I assumed we'll figure it out. Everybody gets married, so you figure it out. And I had nothing. I had a job, didn't pay much. Actually, we lived below the poverty level for many years, way below the poverty level. I didn't even know that until I looked it up last week. I didn't know I was living below the poverty level. But I'm not whining because we were fine. We figured it out. Actually, like I said, when we got married, I had nothing but Marilyn. Now, Marilyn had a savings account with $300 in it. Yeah. So I married money, and yeah, it worked out well. And man, at the wedding, it was so great because we had this big reception line, and everybody's coming through, and I kept getting these lumpy handshakes from people, the wink, and man, they were handing me $20 bills and $50 bills. We went on a honeymoon with more cash money than I had ever seen in my life. It was great. But when it came time to have kids, we want to have kids. We want to have a family. Okay, let's have a family. Can we afford it? Never thought to ask that question. Everybody has kids, and you feed them, and you take care of them, and it works out. And it did. So the economic issue doesn't really cut much with me, based on my experience anyway. But the other issue is that many people today find it culturally irrelevant. Why bother with a legal ceremony and all the rigmarole? We'll just get together. Second cultural trend, women are having less children. Now, I don't know why these studies word it the way that they do. I don't know why they don't say mothers and fathers are having less children, because men come in really handy when it comes to having children. But U.S. Census Bureau reported in 2014 that almost half, 47.6%, almost half of women aged 15 to 44 are childless. I'm glad to hear a lot of 15-year-olds are childless. That's a good thing. But that's the highest percentage of childless women since they started tracking such things in 1976, and that's a trend. Now, on the flip side of that, they've done a study with families. When they talk in terms of families and husbands and wives, they are having more kids. The trend is that they are having 3 or more children. And so we want to thank the members of our staff, Matt and Alicia Robinson, and Daniel and Katie Reed, for upholding our part in keeping that trend going. Trend number 3, more children are born outside of a mom and dad who are married than ever before. 57% of parents aged 26 to 31 are having children outside of marriage. Trend number 4, divorce happens. And we all know that. Some people feel that divorce is almost inevitable. Now, the statistic that has been thrown around for years and years is that half of all marriages end in divorce. And there are people today who dispute that. And there's one guy who said he had it all figured out. He's got the numbers. He knows how to run them. He says the exact percentage is 42%. We know divorce happens. Some of you have been divorced. You may have divorce in your family. You know what it's like. You know how nasty it is, and you know how it hurts. Divorce happens. Within our culture, we have recently changed the legal definition of marriage. On June the 26th, 2015, the Supreme Court of our land ruled that the legal definition of marriage now includes same-sex unions. So, those are the trends in the United States of America in 2016. And so what we're interested in this morning is how should we be trending as people who are followers of Christ and who want to hear what he has to say and to be obedient to that and to understand the wisdom of that. How should we be trending with regard to marriage and family today? Now, I'm going to say some things, and I want to say this up front. I am not looking for applause lines, so please don't give me any, okay? Because I don't want this to be strident. I don't mean it to be anything but the most gentle and kind and respectful and loving declaration of God's word possible. So that's the heart that it's coming from. So no applause lines. You might say, I wasn't going to applaud you anyway. So, okay. What is the definition of marriage according to Christ followers? It is this. You can go to our website. You can look up our belief page. And in the midst of a lot of other things, here it is. Marriage and family are the foundation of human civilization. Marriage is the lifelong union of one man and one woman in a single exclusive pairing as ordained and described by God. There is no other definition of marriage. And we didn't sit in a room as leaders of the church and say, okay, let's take a vote. How do we want to define marriage here? It's very simple to go to the Word of God, and it's stated in many different places. And Jesus said it explicitly. He's quoted by his follower Matthew. It's in chapter 19. And he says this, and Jesus is quoting Genesis chapter 2, which goes back to the very beginning of the establishment of human relationships. He says, haven't you read? At the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. And he said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother, and he will be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. And therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. And there it is. What about the Supreme Court and what they said and what is now legal in our country? And what about even churches who embrace same-sex marriage and affirm that and celebrate it and even have members of their staff who are living in a same-sex relationship? What about that? They are in error according to God's Word. That's what marriage is. One man, one woman, together, united in a committed relationship for life until death separates them. Sexual intimacy is reserved for marriage. Now, that's another cultural trend that we see today. Living together before marriage or sex outside of marriage is very common these days. And I suppose it's always been common, but we're far more open about it today than what we ever have been. And it's affirmed and accepted more so even. Today, here's another statistic, 70% of women aged 30 to 34, and this would include men, have cohabited with a partner, a male or female partner, and 2/3 of new marriages take place between couples who have already lived together for an average of 31 months. Now, what it says in Genesis 2 is different than that. It says in Genesis 2 that as Adam came together with this lady named Eve, it says Adam and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. And according to Jesus and what he said as he quoted Genesis chapter 2, first you leave your father and your mother, and then you cleave to your wife and to your husband. You commit yourself to this person in some kind of an arrangement or ceremony, whatever that is in your culture, and then you get naked. Too many couples today are getting naked with each other before they leave and cleave and do all the things that God says need to come first in order for this to be what he intends and for it to be the good and healthy thing, the relationship that he intends. Now, we can look at the words of Jesus and we say, okay, did Jesus ever really explicitly say that you have to get married? Does he talk about intimacy outside of marriage? Well, there's a lot of things that Jesus didn't say explicitly that come down to really common sense that I think he would say, I would assume that you know that already without me having to say it. A lot of things he didn't say explicitly. But he did certainly say something clear to a lady he was talking to one time. And again, he talked to her in the most kind and gentle and gracious way, talking to this woman who'd had a really hard life. Middle of the day, she had come to a well and she was drawing water. And she was very drawn to him in conversation because he was so kind to her. And he said this to her. He said, go call your husband and come back. And she said, I don't have a husband. And Jesus said, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you've had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true. And she looked at him and said, I perceive you are a prophet. Because he was right on. That's exactly where she was at. But again, he was so kind as he spoke to her that she went and found all of her neighbors and friends and brought them from the city out to meet this wonderful man who was speaking life and grace and forgiveness to her. But both of them understood his inference and his implication. Your living arrangement is not what it should be. You should be married to someone that you're living with. So there is the moral component to this, that even if we don't understand the wisdom of it or the health of it, if Jesus says this is the way it should be, as people who follow him and honor and respect him, we do what he says, and that's reason enough. But we do see, without getting into all of the emotional and psychological components of intimacy outside of marriage, there's one that's very clear. Before couples get married, it is absolutely so crucial that they get to know each other on a spiritual and an emotional and a psychological level, to understand if you're really suited for each other, if this is a good idea that you come together. Now, we tend to get that all backwards in our culture these days. We're going to take it for a test drive. And we think that the test drive is all about the physical. We got to make sure that's okay, and then everything will fall into place. No, it won't. And what that does is when you put the intimacy first, is all these fireworks start going off in your face, because it's good, and it's fun, and it's pleasurable, and God had a great idea when He gave us a sexual relationship. Yeah, but that will cloud everything. Because you then don't see things you need to see. You're not really getting to know this person at the level where life is lived. And so when you get into this relationship, and if it's been all physical and that other hasn't taken place, you go, after the fireworks die down, you go, whoa, who is this guy? Who is this woman? I see that I didn't know you very well. So it makes an awful lot of sense. It's a very wise thing to postpone gratification until God says it should take place, and get to know each other on that mental and emotional and value level, to really know this person and understand them. And then the fireworks will go off on the honeymoon. I guarantee it. Yeah, God's taking care of all that. That'll work out just fine. Now, you might be asking the question, say, okay, well, we've already messed that up. We're already there, and we've done everything wrong so far as to what you're describing. Okay. Start today. Today can be the day where you drive the stake in the ground and say, okay, from this day forward, we will honor what God has said here is the right and the good thing, especially for a person who is a follower of Christ. This is a good idea even if you're not a follower of Christ. It's an excellent idea. Today will be the day that we will abstain, and we will honor Christ, and we will get to know each other in the right place, and then commit, and then the other. So do whatever you have to do. Now, maybe if you're living together, it's a matter of one partner moving out to another place, and you say, well, at this point, that's not realistic. That's not anywhere close to doable. Okay, well, one of you move to the basement, and one of you live in the attic, and put broken glass around your beds. Whatever you have to do. Do it. And I'm being serious. To honor Christ, and Christ will honor you as you respect Him and honor Him in that way. And good things will happen in your life and in your relationship if you do that. Otherwise, when you're into intimacy with each other, there is nothing that presents. If that commitment isn't there, and if even that legal standing isn't there, there is nothing to prevent one partner walking away from that. And there is nothing more shattering than to give yourself wholly and totally to somebody in the most intimate way. I mean, you're giving your soul to somebody in doing that, and then they walk away from you. That's devastating when that happens. And without marriage, there's nothing to prevent that, nothing even to slow that down. Now, I don't want to present marriage as some kind of a breakup retardant. It's far more positive than that. It's a good thing. Marriage is this wonderful union that brings out the best in life, and it brings out the best in each of us when we have come together with that right person. It's so very good. And so how do we experience this? How do we apprehend this fairy tale that I'm describing right now and that we see in the movies and hear in the songs? How does that happen? Because you might be saying, you make it sound easy. And it's not, because right now we are struggling, and it's hard and it's difficult. What do we do? Well, let's look to the wisdom of Jesus. There are a lot of places in Scripture that talk about the practicalities of marriage and family. And you can read what the apostles have to say in some very specific ways. The Apostle Paul had a lot to say about it. At the time he wrote, we don't even think he was married, which is kind of interesting, but he had a lot to say, and it's really good. And you can copy down the scriptures that are up there and look those up. Peter had some things to say about it as well. But let's look to Jesus. Certainly, he's the smartest man that ever lived. And he knows how to make relationships best. And so everything that he has to say about, even though he doesn't speak as explicitly about marriage as his apostles did in their writings, everything that he says about human relationships applies 10 times as much in a marriage relationship, because the way that we should treat all people is the way that we should treat each other. And that's the place where we should do it best and most in the way that Jesus said. So what did he say? Well, let's just go through a very famous teaching of his. We find it in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. Matthew was one of his original followers, and he wrote down the words of Jesus. Jesus said this in the beginning of that teaching. He said, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister, and we can insert husband or wife, son or daughter, father or mother, insert whatever family relationship you want. If one of them has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar and go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Our relationship with each other and our families is tied to our relationship with God. And so we need to not be tolerant of those times when we're not together and we're not healthy and things aren't right. Each of us need to bring to that relationship what it takes to make it good and right again. Some of that comes down to the art of the apology. Just knowing how to come to someone in humility and say, now, there's lame ways to do that, and then there's good ways to do that. Here's a lame way to make an apology, to come and say, if I did something that offended you, I'm so sorry. That's lame. That's really lame. That's a politician's apology. No, the right way to come to somebody is to say, obviously, I offended you. It's clear. You mean more to me than anybody. I'm so sorry. You're the last person I would want to offend or hurt. Will you accept my apology? I was wrong. Please forgive me. What do I have to do to make it right? That's how you make an apology. Sometimes I do better at that than others. And this whole, coming to the altar and you realize something isn't right. Do you ever come to church and you've been into it before you walk in the door? Does that ever happen? You just, when you get out of the car? It's happened to us, yes, in the Stever family. It's happened. And, you pull in the parking lot and, I don't know, get into it over whatever with Marilyn and I or the kids, and you say, okay, here we are. Let's go be the happy Stevers. And I can't leave my gift at the altar and leave because I'm preaching that Sunday. So, I'm in a tight spot. And I'm sure I'm the one that would say that because I tend to be very sarcastic. But we've got to be the ones, take it on ourselves. We're the ones, I am the one who will make the move to make it right and make the necessary apology. And you can go to, they have this website. It's the 5 love languages. You've probably been there. On this website, they also have the 5 apology languages. How we like to be apologized to and what means I'm sorry to us. And there's 5 different ways you can do that. So you can get on there, take that test, do the analysis, and you can figure out the perfect way to make things right with your spouse. Jesus said to Peter, when Peter said, how many times do I have to forgive somebody when they come to me? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said, no, you have to forgive somebody a lot of times. It's a bottomless well of forgiveness. And especially in a home, it's a bottomless well where we're willing to say, yes, I forgive you, and I won't continue to bring this up, and I won't continue bitterness. I won't keep a history book of all your wrongs. I will release you from what you've done, and we will move on. We need to have eyes only for each other in a relationship, in a home, in a marriage. Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Well, there's 2 different ways that we can take to heart what Jesus says here, or 2 things that we have to be aware of. First of all, there are any number of ways for lust to erupt in our hearts and our minds these days. And it's interesting that Jesus talks to men. He says, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. Men and women are wired up differently. And the opportunity for men to look at someone other than their wives is limitless out there, especially with the internet and cyber world. If you're a gun owner, you have to be so very careful having a gun in your home, especially if it's a loaded weapon. The risks with that are very high, and so you have to be so very careful. That's how I regard a computer and a smartphone. It's like a loaded gun almost to me. because of what is there at just one or two clicks away. You know, you're innocently looking at ESPN and checking out sports scores and looking at an article, and down at the bottom, 21 hottest NFL wives, and that's just the mild stuff. And so, you know I talk about this a lot, and you might think, have you got a problem with this? You really talk about this a lot. The potential is there, and it's there for any man. And so we have to treat that with such care. The internet is so good and so helpful. It can be a wonderful addition to our lives, but it is a loaded gun. And so there's accountability software that you can load into your computer so that there are other people that you know and trust who love you, who will know where you go on the internet. A computer should never be in a private place with one individual late at night. It should never be. Certainly with teenagers, with kids at home, that should never be allowed. That should be highly monitored. The phone should be highly monitored, because there is the potential for devastating relationships and completely altering and contaminating the way we think and how we relate to other people. It's toxic, and we've got to be so very, very careful with that. The second thing is in having appropriate relationships with members of the opposite sex within our marriages. You know, I wasn't kidding when I said Blake Shelton would have been better off if he had kept his distance from Gwen Stefani. That may have started out as very innocent. And that's how affairs and adultery start. Very, very innocent. A one-on-one conversation over lunch. Something, dinner after work if you've had to work late. Some kind of a recreational activity, running together, whatever it might be. It starts very innocently as a conversation, and then bang, it escalates, and it happens. And the rule is, you just don't do it. You just don't have this deep friendship with somebody of the opposite sex who is somebody other than your spouse, and you don't spend time alone with this person under any circumstances. You don't do it, unless it's your grandmother, guys. That's okay. You just don't do it. And those are the safeguards that we can build in, the firewalls that we build in to ensure that we can adhere to and appreciate what Jesus is saying here to us. Marriage is a permanent covenant that results from a very deep commitment that we make to each other, legally and spiritually. Divorce is permitted in marriage, according to God's word, in only the very worst of situations when there has been marital unfaithfulness. That's the allowance that is made as Jesus speaks. He says, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Otherwise, to divorce and remarry for any reason other than biblical grounds, Jesus says, and these are Jesus' words, it's an act of adultery. Divorce is wrong. Divorce is brutal. It's devastating. And so, Jesus says, what God has joined together, let no man separate. And what this takes is commitment, and that's the formula that God gives from the very beginning. For this reason, a man leaves his mother and father and cleaves to his wife. This word cleave is so rich in pictures and symbols. It means to cling. It means to stay close, to stick together, to be stuck. It means, I love this one definition, it means to fasten your grip. Fasten your grip on someone or on a relationship. One of my favorite pictures is a picture of my mom and dad, and it's their wedding picture. And my dad is standing there, and he's got his arm around my mom, and his arm is around her waist, and she's got her arm like this, and it comes through and around her waist, and then he's locked on her wrist. He had big old hands, and he is absolutely locked on her wrist, around her waist. It's like, I got you. And you're not going anywhere. And she didn't go anywhere for 72 years of marriage. Commitment. That's what it takes. To say, I am coming to you with this sincere intention of permanence. Divorce is unthinkable. You don't talk about it. You don't joke about it. You especially don't joke about it in front of your children. And whatever it takes, we will work this out because it is the right thing and it is God's intention. Now, I know things don't always work out. I know. We've had divorce in our family. I've seen it firsthand. We have divorced couples here. We have divorced and remarried couples. And there are many questions coming to your mind now going, wow, what about? Well, let me say this in regard to many of the things that I've said so far, with regard to sex before marriage, sex outside of marriage, divorce and remarriage. You know what we have to do as followers of Christ? Nobody in here has walked in here this morning with a perfect life. We have all done things and been in places and things have happened that we regret. And that's who Christ is all about. That's what Christ is all about, to helping us with those situations. So today we don't want to roll around in and agonize over what's in the rearview mirror. It's in the rearview mirror, okay? You can't unscramble the eggs. And so the grace of Christ and the forgiveness of Christ helps us with those situations to do better from this day forward. And so today is the day we drive the stake in the ground with regard to intimacy, with regard to divorce and remarriage. If you're married now, okay, you're married. Hear the words of Jesus. It's for keeps. It's for good. Work it out. And we need to help each other work it out. And if you need prayer in that regard, if you need help from us on staff as leaders in the church, we want to pray with you, encourage you, do everything we can to make your lives and your homes and your relationships successful. And we're not the only ones that can do that. Good, trusted friends can help you do that as well. So we can't change the past, but we can change the future. The future can be different as we understand things that maybe we haven't understood before. So we drive the stake in the ground. We don't look in the rearview mirror. We look out the front windshield and we move forward with Christ in grace. So I don't want to maybe I've made it sound negative up to this point. You know, it's not a sentence. It's not a life sentence. It's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing, because in this day and age, when relationships are so superficial, they're so Facebook and tweeting and whatever, you know, we think we know each other and we don't know each other at all. And our lives aren't anything what we post on Facebook. Isn't it nice to know that there can be this place where you've got at least this one person that you can count on, this person that you know, and this person knows you, and they love you anyway. They love you in spite of yourself, and they're going to be more reliable than any other person in your life, and they will always be there, and you can always count on them, and they will be loyal to you and be affirming for you. Isn't it wonderful to have that person in your life? And it can be that way. It's not the impossible dream. Jesus says there are right things to focus on in life, and certainly these are the things to focus on in our homes and in our marriages. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these other things that we tend to worry about will be added to us. So in our lives with each other as husband and wife, and in our relationship with our kids, what they need to hear from us are the things that are most important that we're pursuing. And that's a relationship with God, and loving relationships with each other, and learning of God and honoring God in our lives, and going after those things, those life qualities that are described for us. Love, and finding joy, and where you find peace, and exercising patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness being exhibited toward one another, self-control being demonstrated by parents to kids. Focusing on those things, and things like college educations and careers and whatever else. All of that will happen or it won't, but the most important stuff will happen if we take Christ at His word when He says these are the things to emphasize and talk about most in our homes. He moves on into chapter 7. Don't judge. Get the log out of your own eye before you start trying to pull a speck out of your spouse's eye. If you're tempted to say something critical that you know is going to create tension, stop yourself and say, is this worth what's about to happen? Is it really worth what is about to take place? 9 times out of 10, it probably isn't. So let it drop. But if there is something that really has to be brought up, it really is a significant issue, along with those things, make sure if those things are on a weighted scale, make sure that any critical comment is far outweighed by 10 or 20 affirming comments. You're great. I love you. I respect you. You do this so well. I love this about you. On and on. It should be so heavily weighted in that direction as we speak with one another. Love as you want to be loved. That's a good summation, isn't it? Jesus says, in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Love each other in our homes like we want to be loved. Or learn how to love each other like they want to be loved. Again, go back to the 5 love languages. Fun little analysis you go through, because what says love to me probably isn't what says love to Marilyn, my wife. So we learn what those things are, and there's 5 of them. There may be more, but anyway, in this analysis, there's 5 of them. Physical touch, hand holding, arm around the shoulder, affectionate squeeze, peck on the cheek, those kinds of things. The giving of gifts, time spent with each other, doing what each other likes to do. That's another one. Affirmation, already talked about, words of affirmation, the kind and good and encouraging things we say to each other. That communicates love on a special level to some people. To serve each other. That's everybody's love language. Everybody should have the heart of Jesus in giving what it takes to make a home a good and safe oasis in this world. And so guys, this week, Tuesday night, World Series. Instead of that, watch Fixer Upper with your wife. That's a way that you can serve your wife, even beginning this week. Do a little survey here. How many of you have been married? Let's start with 20 years. How many of you have been married more than 20 years? Raise your hand. All right, very good. How many more than 30 years? All right, a lot of veterans here. 40 years. Okay. Marilyn and I will be married 40 years this coming Sunday. Wow. 50 years. How many golden anniversary people? 50 or more years. You got a couple back here. Okay, get them high. All right. Anybody been married 75 years or almost? Anybody? 75 years. Okay, look back here. You see that hand? Okay, folks, these are the rock stars with us today, okay? This is Ova and Helen Lowe. This is a picture of their wedding day back in 1941. They were married on November the 1st, 37 days before Pearl Harbor. Ova was in the Army. Here's 1943. I told him today, I said, you look like movie stars here. Like this is some MGM war movie or something. And then here they are today. Helen and Ova, 75 years together. Yeah, wow. So you can go up and give them a hug gently this morning. Maybe give them some lumpy handshakes if you want to. But wow, God bless you. And that is such a strength to have you and have others here, these veterans of relationships. That's an encouragement to say, look at that, it can happen. And they would be the first to tell you, it hasn't been perfect. There are ups and downs. It's a roller coaster ride. But for the most part, it's a very, very good thing. When you have invested that much of your life in another person and in your children for that many years, it's a good thing. It's the good thing that God intended. Well, I don't have time to talk about children, obviously. Those are 2 different sermons. But I will say this, that moms and dads, husbands and wives, the way that you can bless your children best is to bless each other most. A strong marriage makes for strong children because that's where they learn life. That's where they learn everything is from you, and especially as you come together as husband and wife and mom and dad. I certainly learned from my mother and father. They weren't perfect. It wasn't a perfect marriage, but it was a good marriage. And I'm still and always will reap the blessings of that. And again, you may say, you know what? Right now, we're in a place where we're not much of an example at all because things are really rocky for us. Let's help each other and let us help you. You know, we talked about the blue cards. Write on your blue card if you want. We need talk. We need to talk. We need help. We need encouragement. We need prayer. And we can do that. We're not assuming that everything is as it should be this morning, but we're not holding up an impossible ideal either. It can be good. But we got to look to God. God is really smart. Jesus is the smartest man who ever lived. And if we believe him at his word and we hear his word and have the courage and the tenacity to abide by what he says is the way to do it, it makes a difference.